Greetings, future fossils. Welcome to another episode of the podcast that explores our place in time. But seriously, we are living in a very unique moment in the history of this planet, possibly anywhere. Something that the stratigraphers and geologists call the Anthropocene, a geological era defined by the impact of human beings on the records that we leave in the rocks. So yes, we are indeed and in fact literally future fossils. The radioactive isotopes we leave in the soil, the carbon record that we leave in the ice cores, the massive amounts of concrete that we will have left behind us. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the documentary series The World Without Us, but I had a blessed opportunity to discuss this really cool show with Chris Ryan, the anthropologist and host of Tangentially Speaking, when I met him at Burning Man last week, which was super cool. He was one of the major reasons that I went out and attended it this year. And you know, we thought a lot about what the world will be like after we are gone, but by whom will it be observed? What kind of things are we leaving in place for people? Had a really great conversation about this, and also about the urgency of our moment with the extraordinary painter Hannah Faith Yata a few months ago now, middle of July, which made editing this episode unusually strange and uncanny and prescient, because we found ourselves talking about some things that have come to pass in the news since then. The rumor of human augmented hurricanes as just one of those things. But in general, this conversation leaps into the delightful domain of rebellion through art, the party as a revolution, what it means to recapture the sense of intrinsic wildness that is our birthright as human beings. We're animals, people. We're something that the planet is doing. And our wildness, even if we see it as paved over by culture, that culture is something that is also a force of nature. It's up to us to restore a balance and a health in the relation between these two ultimately fabricated concepts. In fact, nature is itself just an artifact. The idea that nature is something separate from us is a product or a consequence of the modern world. So what does it mean to rewild ourselves in light of this? We get into this, and it's a super delightful conversation. But first, I want to thank all of you who have been supporting this show on Patreon. Special shout out to the new patrons, C. Ryan Mannix and Anomaly. How mysterious. All of you are really helping me out as I transition from a rather unwholesome career as Festival Live Painter to a delightful sense of purpose in the good work as a writer and conversationalist, hosting and facilitating important discussions about the future of our species and our world. So if you want to support this show and grab a ton of music and writing and other goodies in the process, please hop on over to patreon.com/Michael Garfield. Even if you can't support the show with $2, $5 a month, whatever, then I have an extensive archive of free stuff over there that I would love for you to enjoy, including music like this, which is currently being deployed in the FDA clinical trials, exploring the potential of MDMA to cure post-traumatic stress. You have trauma, you have stress? Roll on over to patreon.com/Michael Garfield. Grab yourself some tunes, kick back, relax, and reconsolidate those painful memories, please. Also, everybody who's been rating and reviewing the show on iTunes, thank you so much. It's awesome. I love you. It really helps get this into the ears of other people who will benefit. And ultimately, that is what I'm doing here as a service. And you, as the wider community, have played a very important part in that. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Well, with that, I'm just going to sign off here and leave you with this awesome conversation, folks. Hannah Faith Yata on wildness and wilderness, rebellion and revolution, and what it means to be an animal angel person here alive on the cusp of chaos as we transition into an age beyond our wildest imaginings. Thanks for joining us, Hannah.
Thank you.
So I was just reading the statement for your latest solo exhibition, Dancing in Delirium at the Corey Helford Gallery. And it's super cool, and there's a lot of great things to talk about here. I think that you and I are kind of in a similar headspace with respect to the challenges facing the human being at this moment in time. But before we get into the heady shit, I would love to just introduce you as a person and as a painter to the audience. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you got into this and you know, introduce your work and your passion, perhaps.
Wow. Well, yeah. Okay. So I'm from Georgia. I kind of grew up in a very Christian, small town, and I don't know. I think I mentioned that because it made me think much more deeply when I got separated and ousted from that community, because not only did I just lose that religion part, I was, separated from my family, my friends, everything, gone. So for me, it's been looking under every rock and crevice since then and just kind of figuring out my place in the universe. But besides that, I got interested into feminism in college when I took a class, and it was talking about bodies in art, and it was a lot about how women were viewed in the art world historically and now. And, of course, I studied art in college and I was interested in it, but I didn't know where I was going to go with it. And in 2011, I took a chance and went to New York and interned for some artists, Martin Whitfoot and Adam Miller. And I always mention those because it's I just want to honor my teachers because they meant a lot to me. So, and then from there, I realized that they were very, very awesome, decent people. And that also had a very passionate viewpoint behind their work. So, that completely changed my idea of is this possible? I was I knew it was possible. And I was this is what I want to do with my life, So yeah, that's basically how it started.
That's really, I think, important that you talk about your teachers in all of this, because the thing that I keep coming back to again and again with this show is the importance of continuity. And we're living in a world now where I think you and I grew up in a time that by and large, I think, in your case also, maybe specifically moving out of a world that's very narrowly circumscribed by tradition and then out into the, post-industrial modern landscape of art, metropolitan coastal art world. That's I grew up, at least at the very beginning, I grew up in LA in a world of amusement parks and entertainment media. And all of that stuff is so focused on the future. It's all very much about what are we capable of making? How can we add to the story of progress? And there's less of an emphasis on the value of that which came before, unless you're looking at it maybe we can find some pharmaceuticals in this rainforest, or maybe we can adapt these fairy tales to make some grand performance thing. And so, you look at our American society now specifically these days, and it's very much we don't really have a lot of respect for our elders. I'm certainly guilty of feeling no matter what wisdom my parents have and try to convey to me, that a lot of it is just not even relevant to this world because it's changed so much. And and yet it's like we're losing the script. We're like, we've lost the plot as a species, focusing so much on the change. And like, there really is something very essential and basic and human and necessary about like intergenerational knowledge transfer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like that's the thing that scares me, is that like so much knowledge has been lost. Like I look at, we live in Pennsylvania now, and it's like, I'm surrounded by all this lush wildlife and I have no idea what to do with it. Like I bet there's some amazing things that you could do with these plants, like if there was any, I don't know, I had like a headache or, I didn't have any Tylenol, it's like how all this wonderful information that we've lost because I mean, it's like we're relying on this crutch of technology and for all these people to provide it for us. And we just have like no knowledge of our own anymore. It's like, I don't know. That's me.
You put a lot of different species in your artwork. And I wonder, like, do you use the painting and the opportunity, like the symbolism of a painting, to use that as an opportunity to include like specific creatures, like, I mean, to kind of new ageify that, like to talk about like an animal medicine or a plant medicine, just meaning like almost the archetypal quality of it? Or is that not a thing?
Yes and no. I mean, like, I tend to shy away too much from being like, oh, I put this because, like I want to talk about, the praying mantis and how it goes from, how it could be like a symbol from going to this world to that world. I don't know. Like, I don't really like to just make it so specific. Like, I like to put a lot of different things in there so that it feels natural, unless I'm not saying something about that. If it, usually like I might make it a more very, like right now I'm doing this piece with a bunch of the same birds but it's all about like cannibalism. Like, like, so when I do like a lot of different animals or plants and stuff like that, it tends to be, like sometimes it's a little bit about symbolism, but more often than not, I like to just make it wild, make it, like a more about, I mean, there are archetypes and I'm kind of like talking around this space right now, but I don't make it so general, if that's the short answer. Yeah.
That notion of the wild is something that you really emphasized in your statement about this new show. And I think about this all the time. And this is like one of the things I'm most excited to talk with you about. Cause like this, we have this notion that we have climbed to the top of the food chain and that we've made it, sort of, that we're in charge now. And it's like to the point where we're talking about planet scale climatological engineering. Like we're not like proud enough to claim that we control the weather, but we're really close. We're really close to, like, it seems like in a few decades people are going to admit, okay, we created that hurricane to disrupt this particular military operation.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's
So, but like we're not really separate from wilderness. And so even to the extent that we've completely eradicated wilderness on Earth, we're still sort of like made out of it. And like all of the human activity is like a function of wilderness, sort of like, like the city is in the wilderness, like it's a piece of it. And it's like, I don't know if you think about it like that, but like I see, so much of the wildness of your art is actually like a visual echo of some really sophisticated human artistic and cultural traditions, like Polynesian artwork, or I don't know what they call that. It's not like Roticello glasswork, but like the very specific glasswork that shows up sort of sometimes in place of eyeballs on your creatures. Yeah. And I don't know, like what does wild wildness mean to you, and why do you feel such an urge to express that on your work?
Wow. Well, to me, like the city, for instance, is like, to me, that's like a virtual reality that's made out of brick and steel, that we've created. And there are elements that I do like bring into my artwork that kind of, I don't know, to me, it kind of gives it this kind of strange, weird quality. So that you have like this sort of artificial motifs that are happening that juxtapose with the very organic forms. Wildness for me means, like, leave it the fuck alone. We talk about wildness, like some people think that Central Park is wild, but that's like, people have planted trees there, like they garden, they make sure all the weeds are kept out. Like if it was wild, they would be doing nothing to it, just let it be. Yeah, I mean, everything, I feel like when it comes to, our food and all this stuff, I guess my years in the city just made me like realize how toxic the environment was. And I was so frustrated being there because it was so hard to feel like anything that I was eating was good for me. It's like they spray it with these things that ripen it. And, just like, where the hell is my food coming from? But yeah, it's like, just don't touch it. Like, and it's funny, like even when I get on a plane these days, it's like you look out the window and you don't see like really any stretches of land that don't have any roads on them. They're just like, it's just all populated basically. And it really freaks me out because I think that it came from my early childhood where, one of the biggest things I loved to do when I got home was escape. I was just like, I'm going to go play out in the woods, but nowhere could I go without stepping into my neighbor's yard. And yeah, it just really drove me crazy. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Totally. I had this. This is how I reconcile that sort of childhood trauma. Like you're talking about stepping into your neighbor's yard. Like I had that happen once where my dad lived on a canal, and I was walking behind the house, and this is in Florida where everybody's got like a screened in back patio. So there's a lot of like runway kind of between the house and the canal. And I was just walking behind the houses down the street, and I was walking past the neighbor who was out in his backyard, and I waved at him, and he like got all like aggressive and like, who are you and what are you doing back here? And I was like, oh, I live next door to you. I'm your neighbor.
Wow.
And it was this thing of like, well, we're on the water, sort of like, it's like a creek, but it's like, there's something kind of special about being on like a beach or something that I feel like, maybe I'm just naive to think that should be, it's like everybody's beach, or it's like being in the subway where it's kind of anonymous and kind of shared and yet, no, I'm totally like on, like in between these two invisible lines. And,
exactly.
And like, I don't know, like flying over Australia, the lines were different. Like I saw, like they have more triangular plots of land, more circular plots of land than they do in the US. And I just like, you're right that like to see it from the air, it's obvious where our ideas have started to press into, to like imprint and take form as like, they're like making an impression on the land. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's extremely disconcerting. It's like, I mean, it's just like, how do these animals thrive? Like we just moved to this place, and, it's supposed to kind of be a park. Like it's supposed to, like you're not supposed to cut any trees down. unless you absolutely have to, or if they're going to like fall on your house. But like, there were so many bears here last year, and this year they're gone. It's like, oh, I guess they got cold. What the fuck, you know? And then I go to get some flowers the other day, and the lady is like, oh, you know, these are deer resistant, but you shouldn't really have a problem because they culled the deers like 2 years ago. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that was their habitat. We shouldn't even be here. You know, like, we're encroaching on their lands. We should be feeding them. Sorry, but maybe that's me.
Well, there's like, did you read Hakeem Bey's Temporary Autonomous Zone? That book?
No. I'll have to write it down.
It's really cool. It's in a way, I think it's like the poetry version of your art. Like, I get a very similar, what he calls ontological anarchism. And he lays it out in this book where he basically says that like everything that we think is, you know, the empire, everything that we think is like the Matrix, that all of this stuff is just like a bubble that has formed in the much larger reality, that's actual reality, and that it's going to pop one day. It's going to pop, you know, and that like that it never really existed in this absolute sense, that what really exists is the wilderness. And like I remember when I was 16 or so, and we were studying the Romantic poets, and so we were supposed to go out behind our houses and write about nature. And it was like all these planes flying by and trains and cars and stuff. And I was like, I just had this moment where something either clicked or snapped, depending on what you think is healthy. And I was like, all of this stuff is nature. Forget, you know, just like this plane is wilderness. And it's just not like the kind of wilderness that my body is adapted to. That like it's that all this stuff that we think we're doing on purpose, maybe like we're just doing it for reasons that we don't really understand, and it's like as automatic as an anthill in some ways. So I was like, I've been like trying to place my full faith in that view and like try to not see it as like man versus nature, but it's hard. We grew up like this, you know, we grew up kind of being imprinted on.
Yeah. Well, I think I see what you're saying. So you think this sort of progress thing is evolution sort of thing.
Well, I mean, it's like, on the one hand, yes, like nature is over here, like civilization is over here.
Or not.
But on the other hand, there's really only one thing happening, and we're not in control of it. So I've been like trying to say it's not so much that we're unnatural as it is maybe that we're unhealthy in our like we could be expressing a much healthier version of natural than we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I think before we started like tearing up the ground to get, you know, steel and all of these other building materials, and I guess that's like my question with the whole problem of civilization is that I feel like it's gotten to this point where it's unhealthy, it's sick, you know, like it's almost like we are breeding this psychological state of mind that just keeps consuming, and it keeps making, like they said before, it's like, you know, they thought for a while that technology was going to be the savior. But it's like the more technology becomes it's like the more you further it, the more complicated it becomes, the more things you have to sustain it. And I think, to me, and maybe this is my sort of silly romantic idea, is that we need to simplify, you know, like we don't need all this stuff. We don't need all this like very complicated terms or like ways of doing things. We just need to like cut back on all this crap, you know? but so
there's like there's an emotional quality to all of this. And when you talk about the name of the show being Dancing in Delirium, and delirium as it says here, delirium as it relates to brain necrosis,
Yeah.
the last gasps of energy and synapses that are sparking out, the flailing, twirling, and searching of the being to grapple with the true nature of of reality and the divorce of its roots from the earth. And it's like, there is something, I don't know, like looking at your stuff, it kind of reminds me of like in the Roaring 20s. Like when everybody realized like jazz and all of this stuff came up around the time that people had just lived through the First World War. And there's this relationship, I think, between the sort of like existential terror. You talk about like the despair and the flailing and the confusion, and there being this like sweetness and this color. And I feel like you really balance the beautiful and the grotesque in your work in a way that feels very honest to like what it means to be alive right now, sitting with all of this existential fear and all of these unanswerable questions.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, it's like when I was in the city, you know, you feel like it's beautiful. Like I love watching the lights. I love going out at night. But at the same time, I think that I did come face to face with this existential fear of, you know, just being so engulfed in this like kind of consumer society with all these ads, you know, like where I used to work was around like 34th Street. So every day I'd have to go to work and there was like all these like stores and ads and things like throwing advertisements at me. And it just, you know, that you get to this point where you're just like, this isn't right, you know, like this isn't how I'm supposed to live, you know, or like, where is just the being? Like, how can you just exist in this environment that's constantly like just throwing stuff at you? And like, to me, I when I read like Carl Jung and Eric Fromm, like those guys just like clicked immediately because they were talking about sort of this whole sickness in society where, you know, people are thrown into larger and larger groups of people, and where it's like they go to these cities and you lose this connection with just being, just existing with nature, but you're like fighting for your life, basically. It's like your ego is kind of like lost in this other sea of people. And, you know, the ego is so fragile. So when it's in this mass of people, it has to figure out a way to like, I matter, you know, say that I matter. It's like, how do you figure out that you matter? And Jung says, he's like, you know, the way people do this is they have this need for power. And you kind of see that everywhere. I mean, like, it's like everybody is trying to like become these celebrities, especially with the internet. It's like, you know, they want to show that they have wealth, even if they don't have it. And it's like you're constantly trying to look like these people on TV. Maybe I'm just babbling at this point, but yeah.
That's what this is for. The format is for deep question babbling.
Yeah.
Well, so this thing of like the human beings have it like difficulty with adapting to the scale of modern life, I think is really fascinating. Like in a way, it's like, I think or most people's real objection is to that, actually. Like when you look at the Romantic poets, you know, it's like they didn't give up any of the conveniences of their lives. What they rejected seemingly was more about the way the human being doesn't really fit into a landscape like New York anymore. Like it's very, like my buddy Mitch Mignano says, you know, he talks about like New York literally is a giant machine.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're in that landscape, it's like you're in that, like that little cartoon Rube Goldberg machine getting tossed around, trying like like a Looney Tunes cartoon, like trying not to get squished between its gears.
Exactly.
And like the visions that I have of the future that I really, like long for and believe in, like the believably healthy future is not one that's like lower technology than ours per se, but like one in which the like scale of an everyday life of a person is back down to like a manageable level where you're not constantly bombarded by news from other places that they're trying to convince you is relevant to you. And so you're feeling the fear of every single person in every country about their problems that they're having over here, which admittedly, like, it's probably important to know some of that stuff, but like the amount that we allow some sort of like tribal dispute between people 8,000 miles away from us to affect how safe we feel on a daily basis is just nuts.
Yeah. Well, that's also like can be argued for our sort of displacement in the universe, is that we have all this information coming at us at all times. And so like we hear about wars where millions of people or thousands of people are getting killed. And, like it's all reinforcing this idea that we don't matter. And our ego is like, no, you do matter, and it kind of comes out in subconscious ways. And to me, I feel like if we don't like realize this and kind of bring it to a conscious level and kind of come to terms with this sort of, idea that it's like what we're sort of confronted with, and maybe I might regress into conspiracy theories, but it's like,
we'll go anywhere. I'll follow you. I will follow you all the way into conspiracy theory, conversational Mordor.
Oh man. All right. Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's all kind of this fear-based reality that we're living in, which controls us and sort of is trying to, mess with us on a subconscious level so that, we are manipulatable, anyway, yeah, that's without going too far into conspiracy land. But yeah.
So I think, maybe another symptom of this would be the proliferation of cute pet videos online. Like I think most of us are so like just overwhelmed by the pace of things these days that it's very easy to just be like, I'm going to clock out. And in the same way that my parents' generation, so many of them, I think, they got home from work every day and like just watched television, and it's like, now the TV's always there. It's like in little bite-sized pieces, but there's something on the one hand, you've got, skyscrapers and $1 trillion deficits and the singularity. Like, who really sits down and like thinks about an age in which machines are just like smarter than us and can outmaneuver us in every way, and is like, yeah, I'm like not freaking out about that. Like I'm excited about things, I get excited about the like transcendental potentials of stuff, but it's because there's something broken inside me, and from an early age, I've always been like super fascinated and curious about terrifying shit. Like if it's scary, I'm curious about it, and so it's like that's really what it is. It's like, oh no, it's like this stuff is really, like an age where anybody can print their own drugs in their bedroom out of like a little chemical printer is an age where like everyone has access to chemical weapons, also can like make their own chemical weapons, and like trying to, I don't know. Now we're both ranting, but no, yeah. Like I think it's to try and like weave this back into your artwork. There is a sense of like almost like Dionysian celebration or like just this urgent, explosive, party like it's 1999 kind of vibe?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, well, I guess to me, I like to think of my work as more of this very strange sort of awakening of a rebellion, but I don't know, like everybody has different views when they come to my work. But no, it's true. I mean, like, I feel like with the whole, animal videos, it's actually kind of cool because I feel like people are starting to be like, oh, wow, I can make friends with a bear or something like that. But at the same time, if you overdose on animal videos all the time, it's like you don't really think about life. So you just go to work, you do your job, you come home, and, if you get bored at some point, maybe you're just scrolling through Instagram and spend the rest of the evening looking at animal videos. So I don't know. Yeah.
Can we talk about rebellion since you brought it up?
Sure. Where do you want to start from there?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned that you've got a strong thread of feminism running through your stuff. And there's obviously a really, again, to go back to Hakeem Bey's stuff, there's a definite connection between a party and a revolution, and I think that it's very easy to see, on the one hand, like a kind of urgent celebration also being a rebellion, like you're mentioning here, or that, like, when people talk about going into the jungle and there just being species everywhere, flowers of all different kinds, insects, and it just being the word that you might use for that is like riotous.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I had JF Martel on the show before, and he wrote that book Reclaiming Art in the Age of Artifice, and it's for him, I think it's very much about art as a window into the transcendental, which is in that sense of, like, hide your eyes from the face of God, like it's just this explosive thing that to one person is like an explosive evolutionary upset of the order of our lives, and to somebody else is just like a blissful orgasmic opening, but it's the intensity that you really capture in your stuff. And I'm curious, I would love to hear you say more on rebellion and like what's going on and stuff. I mean, because not everyone who sees your work is going to listen to this, obviously. So like, you're not, don't feel like you're like ruining someone's ability to interpret your stuff for themselves.
Yeah, that is the funny thing about explaining artwork, isn't it? It's like you don't really want to kind of close those doors of perception when people kind of come to face with your artwork. But yeah, I mean...
But rebellion's important to you.
Yes, it is. Well, for starters, I think that this sort of kind of this whole like sort of nude, naked female figure kind of originated, I think, looking back from my sort of subconscious as this like rebellion against like my Christian background and how strict it was. It's kind of like, the ultimate rebellion for me physically was to like dance around naked and just be like, fuck you, I'm not pretty. It's cool. It's like, I've got this weird stuff going on over here. It's like, it wasn't the beautiful female that like is pictured in historical paintings and stuff like that. But as it progresses, it's funny because it's almost been like 8 months since my show, and I didn't discover the concept of the divine feminine until like really recently. And I was reading about it and it's like, wow, this has so much to do with my work. It's not about like specifically like gender. It's more about this concept of this this conscience or this consciousness that, benefits all things and is this sort of life force of the natural world. And, like some people might say it's like the Gaian mind or something like that. But I feel that in a way, I see it more and more in artwork as like more artists are talking about this technological world and what we're doing to it. And yeah, for me, it is like this idea of just like casting off this weight of, I don't even know where to go from here. I mean, like, I just feel like our footprint is so heavy at this point. And to me, it's like
carrying all that shit.
Yeah. It's like you just want to move. You just want to like be free without like this stuff. Like I just get overwhelmed every time I move. I'm like, oh my God, I have so much stuff. But yeah,
I'm the same way. No, that's totally. Yeah. It's totally like this. Since I was a teen, I've been just like go through these periodic purge phases where I'm just like, I start getting kind of awkward and irritable, and then I realize that what it is I've just got to like unload about 100 pounds of personal possessions. That it's like it's almost by weight. And again, that sort of goes back to that issue of scaling. Like when you look at I don't know, I think it was National Geographic that did that awesome project where they took families from all over the world and they put them in front of their houses they took all of their belongings out of the house and laid it out in front. And you'd see what people considered sort of a normal set of possessions from culture to culture. And of course the Americans had like so much stuff. And I was just like, wow, we really don't need, like, living anywhere else in the world. They don't even have, it's like a fraction of this. And it's like 5,000 Facebook friends, when in reality, you're only going to remember like 300 people well.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And it's like, maybe I'm convinced that I'm just like a canary in the coal mine as far as like getting stressed out by having to keep track of too many personal belongings.
Yeah.
And that gets back to that, just rip it off and run. It's like, did you Barbara Ehrenreich's wrote a book, Dancing in the Streets, where she connects these two ideas of dance and like revolutionary change.
Oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
I haven't read it, but people keep bringing it up to me because it's like you really get into that thing about the role that festivals and celebrations have in getting us out of our normal lives and like opening a window to let a new order establish itself.
Yeah, I think there's something very freeing, revolutionary in the psychology and also just the spiritual practice of dancing. I hate to use those terms because it's like I kind of hate the idea of religion, but yeah, I mean, like spirituality is something that is completely different from religion to me anyway. Well, I mean, I used to be extremely religious, but I had no spirituality, or I thought I did, but it was a total sham. But yeah, I mean, like, I do think that there is something so ultimately freeing and beautiful about just being extremely free in your body and your mind, because, yeah, I mean, you can't free your body without freeing your mind. Well, to me anyway. But yeah.
Can I ask a kind of, you've probably been asked this question before.
Sure.
But I look at all of your pieces and none of them have a human face.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know,
Why?
for me, I've always been kind of like soft on faces as an artist. Like I'm not good at them, and that's why I don't do them. You know, like I've avoided it like the plague. But in your case, you're such a talented artist that it's clearly intentional.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the feminist themes and, you know, your decision to use the body as more of a symbolic instrument or vehicle, or where, you know, what's going on there, because you're not shy of animal faces, you know.
Yeah.
It's very like 21st century hieroglyphics, sort of, in that sense.
Yeah, I did BOB's face, but that was a commission. I'm not fond of human faces, and I'll tell you why. Like, for me, seeing somebody's face and having to analyze every single detail, every wrinkle, every little nuance is just, you know, like if you think about painting and its historical significance, it's like you're immortalizing this person, you're immortalizing their ego. To me, though, like, I think it's all about more or less the abolishment of the ego and this realizing that we're a part of nature, that we see ourselves in nature. And I think that was like the beautiful idea of the pagan religions and all of these, you know, more ancient traditions of seeing yourselves in animals, or seeing personalities or spirits and mountains and landscapes, or, you know, seeing the sea as a being in itself, or a god or a goddess. Yeah, like I feel like, to me, that's when we had more of a respect and a relationship with the world around us. Now I feel like we're sort of burying our faces in the television screen or our iPhones. Or, you know, it's like I don't want to shit on portraiture, because I think it's beautiful, but it's just not what I'm, you know, I guess that's not my statement. So yeah.
It seems like, you know, when I look at your stuff, again, as an expression of the zeitgeist, like if I think of the artist as just somebody who's doing the work of communicating something bigger than all of us. Yeah. It's like trying to be a story that's trying to be told. And in the history of art, you know, there was, at the very beginning, our human figures and our animal figures were merged, you know, in the shaman image, or, you know, the typhonic stuff, the centaur, all of the, you know, the Egyptian gods. And as we grew out of it and sort of, you know, solidified that line between the city and nature, then we lost that. But now we're at a point where we're getting back into this. I think, you know, there's a lot of ways in which electronic cultures are more like pre-modern oral cultures, right? Like that's Marshall McLuhan talks about this. Like, we're no longer distancing ourselves from what we read. You know, it's not merely visual. We're surrounded by media now in a way that the book doesn't do it. Like, the book is at arm's length constantly. It's like a tiny little thing. Whereas now it's like everyone's walking around with their Bluetooth earbuds, and, you know, it's the internet is literally surrounding you in that way. Like, you hear it, it's all everywhere all the time. And so it's more like acoustic, resonant, networked. We're more like embedded in or immersed in our media than our parents or our grandparents were, or, you know, the people were 200-300 years ago. And there's like it seems like the trend is toward like what you're talking about, like a diminishment of the ego and a replacement of that isolated self with something that emerges out of its natural environment, something where we really maybe more like ancient peoples, like there's I don't know, just pointing to stuff like cosplay and furries and how kids, how it's totally cool that kids wear tails and ears now, and how I can see that in another couple decades it being kind of a thing for kids to actually have tails, they could Mom, I want to grow my own tail, let me grow my own tail. Okay. I don't know, just I think we're sort of in order to gain in order to reclaim our full humanity, it seems like we are actually giving up some of what we thought it meant to be human, to make us uniquely human. And then we're able to, by doing that, we're able to reclaim the part of us that is an animal and the part of us that's I don't know, again, with the spirituality language, but the angelic or transcendental part of us. If we just pull the pretentious, prideful human piece of it out.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. I mean, I feel like everything today is sort of this dance of trying to keep the ego so that it doesn't fly off into space, because, there's so many things that threaten us in a lot of ways. It's I don't have 5,000 Facebook friends, I'm nobody. I had a friend before that seriously did not get hired for a bartending job because he didn't have enough Facebook friends.
What?
Yeah.
No, it's evil.
It's disgusting. So people, they build up their profiles online and they friend a bunch of people that they don't know, and they put all these pictures of themselves on the internet to make themselves look good, and they pose next to cars whether or not they have them. And it's that's not life, how is going to a job that you hate and trying to be friends with people you don't like, and maybe that I'm just horrible for thinking everybody's life is that way, but I feel from knowing a certain amount of people, that was the case a lot, so for me, having these weird faces that, do not conform to most people's idea of beauty, are sort of this whole rebellion of it doesn't have to be pretty, I like this idea of this mystery and this grotesqueness, this wildness, but you don't exactly know what's going on, because if you or I were thrown out in the wilderness tomorrow, it's not like there's some nature god that's going to protect us, it's wild out there. Actual wildness is wild. And, to me, it's kind of communicating this spirit of these beings out there. I think the Japanese Shinto religion has thousands of these beings, and they have all these different terms for them. And, it's so interesting because it's they have this spirit that's in every rock and every tree, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. But, for me, it's just kind of intertwining this kind of strange language into my work, if you will.
I was just talking to Hunter Motz yesterday he runs the Mixed Mental Arts podcast, and he was making this case about the Shinto stuff and giving, it's so many, modern kind of the new atheists, for example, they see this as just an empty and ridiculous superstition, like a waste of human brain power. But he was saying, no, this is a very ancient piece of us, because it's like a cognitive hack. Like, you know that as a human being, if you give something an identity, if you personalize it, if you personify it, then you care about it more. And that's why it's not like these tribes, these indigenous peoples living in New Zealand and South America and all these places. It's not like they're idiots. You know, they don't think the river is a person. They've gotten in the habit. They treat it like a person because it makes it easier to think about, because after all, we are just human beings. But then also because it encourages responsible behavior. Like, it encourages us to treat our environments with respect. Exactly.
I think, yeah, for sure. We have more moral codes when we go to war against other people than we do like hacking through a rainforest. Yeah, I mean, so to be able to personify things and think of them as like these living personalities helps us to remember, like, you know, our sort of respect for these things.
Do you ever think much about the kind of future that you want to live in, that you hope the next generations come up in?
Yeah, yes and no. Like, I border between being so overwhelmed with what's going on, and, you know, at this point, I'm like, no children, you know, like, it's not going to happen, not in this world.
You don't want it, or you're just like...
Well, both. It's just kind of like, I don't really have a feeling for, oh, I must have a child, but I also am just like, are you kidding me? In this sort of like political, economical climate, like, I don't even know if I'm going to live to see 50 by this point. But
it's probably a good attitude to hold, honestly. It's like that way, if you're 39 and you get hit by a bus, you're not like, I've been robbed.
Well, actually, you know, growing up in the religion I did, I didn't even think I was going to see 20. So 50 is old for me, but no, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I digress. The sort of world that I envision if I had kids, or if, you know, any other children, extended family of mine growing up in, I would envision it to... that's a hard question. I mean, there's so many things that have to happen before, you know, any of these things seem like any sort of reality, you know? Like, it just kind of feels like the train is rushing for the wall at this point. But I would probably love to have little feral children that are running around in the forest, but living off the land and not having tons of plastic toys, stuff like that. But
unschooled.
Yes, unschooled.
Their hands are in the dirt.
Yeah. Oh man, I was like listening to something today, and it was talking about how much schooling just it doesn't teach you how to think. You know, like, we aren't taught how to think. We're taught how to memorize. You know, like, we're so sucked into this like mass media concept of either you gotta vote for Hillary or vote for Trump. It's like, oh, there's not another way. We can't just say neither of these bitches. Sorry. But yeah. Anyway.
Totally. Yeah. Again, I don't know if you've heard of like rewilding.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole notion that we can reshape our society to be sort of more like the society that we evolved to, like the kind of situation that a Paleolithic human being was in, but one that would, you know, presumably have all of the benefits, or most of the benefits of our lives, but like, you know, like shoes that don't destroy the arches of your foot and fuck up your posture, you know, or all of these other things that we've done that are supposedly conveniences, but they actually become prosthetics that diminish our native potentials for things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you brought up like the whole Paleolithic side of it, because I was kind of reading some of Maria Gimbuta stuff, and she was like this archaeologist. Oh, so you know her?
No, please.
No,
tell me.
okay.
This is
yeah.
We're getting into it.
Yeah, we're getting into it. Okay. Yeah, so she's like, she found this ancient civilization that's, she thinks kind of originated in the Paleolithic area time period, where it was this matristic society where I believe it was based on agriculture. But the whole thing was that, like, they had this respect for the concept of the divine feminine. And so, like they wouldn't even like basically like poke the earth with a stick, like that was disrespectful. And she found like all these figurines and symbols. So basically like, like the breast and the buttocks of these like sculptures, like the Venus of Willendorf, is kind of, think of that sort of thing. And they had like these spirals on them. And so like she was talking about how like the concept of these sort of protruding forms, like these breast shaped forms, like they worshiped them everywhere in nature. Like if it was a rock, if it was a hill, everything, they sort of worshipped as like this sort of spirit. And we were talking about something. Yeah.
That's like Mark Henson. We just had him on the podcast. He's out in on the West Coast, and he's an older visionary artist, and like a lot of his stuff is landscapes with human features. So like you'll see the mountain range, and it's just like what you're talking about. You'll see the mountain range, and it's a reclined sort of female form, or like these two forests or weather formations are coming together to be a couple making love. And I feel like his stuff in some way is like the yang to your yin, or his is the yin to your yang, that like you've got all of this wildness that's erupting out of the human form, and his is like the human form sort of hidden in or implied by and emerging out of the wildness. And like you both, I guess if you followed them all the way around to the other side, then they would click.
Yeah.
But
that's really cool. Yeah, I think I've probably come across some of his work. That's awesome.
So we ought to wrap it up in a few minutes here, but I want to give you the opportunity to, like, this being a recording for the digital museum, the archive that will one day be hopefully unearthed by archaeologists in their attempts to understand our age. Like what if any messages or questions do you have, getting back to that sort of intergenerational thing? Like if you're an ancestor one day, like they're going to be studying your stuff in art class, whatever that means. They'll be downloading your bio into people's brains or whatever. And look of horror. And but like, one day you're going to be the elder. You're going to be the ancestor, the one that came before. So like what messages would you hope to relay to the future as a distinguished elder in her youth?
Distinguished elder in her youth. Ooh,
what would you say to your future self? Wow.
That's the thing, like every year I get older, I look back and I'm like, God, I didn't know anything. But I mean, I think the biggest question for me at this point is just like, how did we even get to this point? Like, I guess there's so much that has been spinning around in my head as far as, like we see this like insanity of what we're doing. And, you know, maybe a lot of people don't even like pay attention to it, or maybe people think that it's like conspiracies, but it's like the whole like thing with the chemtrails, or if you believe in like the whole HAARP, and this whole idea of some people that, you know, that there's people out there that are trying to depopulate the earth. I think the biggest question for me is like, why are we depopulating when we could just be drawing down? Because it's been proven that educating women and giving them an opportunity and giving them empowerment, you know, that, like, they wiser wiser decisions based on that. Like women that are suppressed and, you know, put into this idea that they should make babies. Of course, they're going to make babies, but I don't think, you know, like at this point, it seems like there's just like this baby making machine, and the population keeps growing, and we just keep like digging ourselves into this deeper and deeper hole. But it's just like, why? So for me, like, I think the biggest thing would be like, give women empowerment so that they, you know, because I feel like women have this understanding of life because they create life. And I do think that if we were able to have coherent human beings that thought about the planet and, you know, our own future generations making decisions, and I'm not talking about Hillary Clinton, but, you know, like really people that were able to think for themselves. I just, yeah, to me, that's like the biggest thing is like, I would like to see that. But as far as, sorry, what was the question again?
Message for or questions to the future.
I guess that's a lot of questions. Yeah, empower your women, empower the earth, see it as this divine creature that you're a part of. We're just like these little tiny skin cells basically on it, and we're doing a lot of damage right now, but that's my thought anyway.
A fine thought. Where can people go check out your stuff?
Physical places?
I'm going to post your website in the show notes and stuff, but if you want to just give people all your web infos.
Oh,
so
sure.
that if they, for whatever reason, you know, sometimes the audio becomes decoupled from the other stuff. So if somebody's just listening to this, like if somebody's listening to this podcast in traffic with their window open and they think that you just said something amazing as they're like stuck in traffic next to somebody, then they're like, who is that incredible person? Where do we send them?
Internet wise? Okay. So internet, I guess I'm on, Instagram and Facebook the most as Hannah Yata. And yeah.
HANNAHYATA.
Yeah.
Folks.
He elaborates it, yes.
And we will actually put this out pretty soon. So if you have any big shows coming out this year that you want to tell people about.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm doing this weird little mushroom show kind of based on the sacred mushroom and the cross with my husband, which is a fun little book. Have you heard of that?
I have heard of that, yes.
Oh yeah, it is wild. And then next year I am working on a solo show with Thanos, and hopefully that'll happen in April.
Faneros Gallery in where
Faneros.
they're in Nevada City, correct?
Yeah.
Super cool. Yeah, that's where I was talking with Mateo at the MAPS conference, and that's where I got to see some of your original paintings for the first time.
All right, that's awesome.
At that,
yeah,
and it's like they really are. Sometimes it's like somebody's that works really impressive online and like lame in person, or vice versa. But your stuff is awesome when marked for 90% reduction, and just as awesome when you're sitting in front of it and you're like, oh. So thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. It's been fun. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Future Fossils is part of the Mind Pod Network, an amazing collection of podcasts along with Third Eye Drops, Synchronicity Podcast, It's All Happening, The Astral Hustle. Be sure to go to mindpodnetwork.com and check it out. And if you'd like to support this show, patreon.com/Michael Garfield. Thanks again. Until next week.